Before Israel had tribes, before the law was given on Sinai, before the word Jew was ever spoken, there was Abraham, a solitary man standing at the crossroads of ancient history and divine destiny. Revered by millions today, his name has become synonymous with faith. But behind the reverence lies a deeper, more unsettling question, one that history, tradition, and even religion have yet to fully resolve. Who was he really? Was Abraham a Hebrew, defined by a lineage that crossed the flood and carried the memory of the God of Shem? Was he a Jew, even though the tribe of Judah and the religion of Judaism had not yet been born? Or was he a Chaldean, shaped by the grandeur of ancient Mesopotamia, immersed in the world of idols, ziggurats, and the moon god of The Bible gives us fragments, history offers context, tradition supplies names, but Abraham's identity cannot be confined to a label, not Hebrew, not Jew, not Chaldean alone. His story does not begin in clarity, it begins in complexity. It begins in a city shrouded in cultural mystery and spiritual contradiction. And from that complexity, God called a man to step away from the familiar, away from his family, his gods, and even his birthplace, and into a journey that would redefine him entirely. To understand Abraham is to look deeper than a title. It is to trace the path of a man whose footsteps crossed rivers and cultures, whose faith overturned ancestral religion, and whose obedience birthed a covenant that would reach across generations. This is not simply the story of where Abraham came from, but the story of how one man became the foundation of something eternal, not through bloodline alone, but through belief. Was Abraham a Hebrew, a Jew, a Chaldean? The answer is not as simple as a single word. It's a layered truth, rooted in history, shaped by culture, and revealed through covenant. And in discovering who Abraham was, we uncover something even more profound: how God shapes identity not through heritage but through calling. If you're ready to journey beyond tradition and uncover the deeper truths hidden within the life of Abraham, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe for more rich biblical storytelling. And if this message stirs something within you, share it with someone who longs to understand not just scripture, but the soul of the man who walked by faith before faith had a name. The Bible introduces Abraham with a specific and evocative phrase, Ur of the Chaldees. At first glance, this points to a prominent city in southern Mesopotamia, known for its towering ziggurats, advanced infrastructure, and deep devotion to the moon god Nana. Ur was one of the crown jewels of Sumerian civilization, a center of wealth, learning, and religious activity. But modern scholarship raises a serious historical issue. The Chaldeans, a Semitic tribe that later played a significant role in Babylonian history, did not inhabit southern Mesopotamia until around the 9th century BCE, nearly 1,000 years after Abraham. This time, which most place around the early 2nd millennium BCE. This makes the phrase Ur of the Chaldees anachronistic, out of place and time in the original context. So why does the Bible use it? Many scholars believe this designation was added by later scribes during or after the Babylonian exile, when the Chaldeans were well known. It was likely included to help readers identify which Ur was meant, since Ur was a common place name across Mesopotamia. This kind of editorial clarification is not uncommon in ancient texts and does not undermine the integrity of the biblical narrative. Instead, it shows how the text often speaks across centuries, making itself understandable to future generations. Therefore, while Abraham may have come from a city named Ur, it is historically inaccurate to identify him as a Chaldean in the ethnic or political sense. He lived long before the Chaldeans entered that region. This subtle detail immediately complicates his identity. From the first mention of his homeland, Abraham eludes our modern categories. The place may be real, but the name carries a later lens. And so, from the outset, the question looms large: was Abraham truly a Chaldean? Not by historical standards. And thus, the mystery of his identity begins. While the label Chaldean is historically questionable, one aspect of Abraham's identity is firmly grounded. He was a Semite descended from Shem, the righteous son of Noah. After the flood, Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became the patriarchs of major population groups across the ancient world. From Shem came the Semitic peoples, including the Arameans, Akkadians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Arabs, and Hebrews. This Semitic heritage was not merely ethnic, it was covenantal. The line of Shem carried the memory of the God who saved humanity through the ark and continued the promise of divine relationship. According to Genesis chapter 11, Abraham was 10 generations removed from Shem through Eber, from whom the term Hebrew is traditionally believed to derive. Abraham's Semitic identity placed him within a broad and diverse cultural world, deeply embedded in Mesopotamian civilization, yet set apart by his unique spiritual destiny. He was not defined by a single nationality or urban center, but by his ancestral connection to a people through whom God's redemptive plan would unfold. In this way, Abraham was not a Jew, which was a term that would emerge many centuries later, and not truly a Chaldean, despite the mention of Ur. Instead, he was a Semitic man, part of a divinely chosen bloodline that bore the seeds of a promise far greater than geography or tribe could contain. Although Abraham descended from the righteous line of Shem, his immediate family was far from monotheistic. According to Joshua, chapter 24, verse 2, his father Terah served other gods, a direct statement that Abraham was born into a house of pagan worship. Living in Ur, a major center of Mesopotamian religion, Terah likely participated in the cult of the moon god Nana, also called Sin, one of the most revered deities in the region. In such an environment, idolatry was not peripheral, it was cultural law. Religion saturated everyday life. Statues of gods filled homes and temples. Families offered sacrifices, burned incense, and recited chants passed down for generations. As the son of Terah, Abraham would have grown up immersed in these traditions, expected to uphold them. But somewhere in that world of idols, Abraham became restless. The silence of lifeless gods could not satisfy the longing within him. Though Scripture does not detail this inner awakening, the sudden call from Yahweh in Genesis, chapter 12 hints that God had already begun to disturb his soul long before Abraham heard his voice. When Abraham obeyed the divine command to leave his father's house, it was more than a physical relocation. It was a spiritual severing. He was not only walking away from his homeland, but from a legacy of idolatry, rejecting the gods his family and culture worshipped. It was a defining moment of spiritual rebellion, a choice to break with everything familiar in pursuit of a God he could not see. This bold act sets Abraham apart from his surroundings. He was not a Jew, for Judaism had not yet formed. He was not a Chaldean, for he had abandoned their gods. He was instead a man set apart by faith, a spiritual pioneer, whose new identity began with a single, radical no to the gods of his father. When God commanded Abraham, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you," Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, it was far more than a call to relocate. It was a call to redefine himself. Abraham's departure from Ur, and later from Haran, marked a radical break with everything that had previously shaped his identity, his culture, his extended family, and his inherited gods. The journey from Ur to Haran, and ultimately to Canaan, stretched across hundreds of miles. But the greatest distance Abraham traveled was not geographical, it was spiritual. He left a civilization saturated with idolatry, where cities like Ur and Haran centered around elaborate temple worship, cosmic deities, and ancestral rituals. In stepping away from that world, Abraham became the first recorded monotheist in biblical history. A man who chose faith in one unseen God over the security of countless visible idols. This was not merely a personal decision, it was a transformation of identity. Abraham would no longer be defined by Mesopotamian norms or Chaldean expectations. His worldview, values, and destiny would now be shaped by a covenant with Yahweh, not by the customs of his ancestors. His movement across the desert symbolized this inner shift. With each step, he crossed from the realm of man's religion into the unknown territory of divine promise. He was no longer a typical citizen of Ur or Haran. He was becoming something altogether new, a vessel of promise, a father of nations, a man whose true identity would be forged not by where he came from, but by who he followed. In this light, Abraham was no longer a Chaldean, though he left from Ur. He was not a Jew, for that identity had not yet been born. He was a man set apart, undergoing a transformation that would ripple through history, one faithful step at a time. The first time Abraham is given a distinguishing title in Scripture, he is called Abram the Hebrew. Genesis, chapter 14, verse 13. This designation is crucial, not just for Abraham's story, but for understanding his place in history. Yet the origin of the term Hebrew, Ivri in Hebrew, has sparked debate among scholars for centuries. One theory traces it to Eber, a notable ancestor of Abraham listed in Genesis chapter 10 and chapter 11. Eber was a descendant of Shem and the forefather of a distinct Semitic line. If Hebrew is derived from Eber in Hebrew, then the name connects Abraham to a specific genealogical heritage within the broader Semitic world, a family line preserved through the flood and marked by divine remembrance. Another view holds that Hebrew comes from the Hebrew root avar, meaning to cross over or to pass through. This interpretation isn't just linguistic, it's deeply symbolic. Abraham quite literally crossed over the Euphrates River, leaving Mesopotamia and all its cultural entanglements behind. But more than geography, he crossed over from idolatry to worship, from the world of many gods to the call of the one true God, from the known into the unseen. In either sense, by bloodline or by action, the term Hebrew fits Abraham perfectly. He was the man who stood apart, who broke with the past, and who stepped into a future shaped by faith. The name Hebrew doesn't simply describe where he came from. It declares what he became, a pilgrim of promise, set apart not by city or tribe, but by his willingness to cross over into the unknown. So was Abraham a Hebrew? Yes, but not merely by descent. He was a Hebrew in the deepest sense, the one who crossed over, physically and spiritually, into covenant with God. Though Abraham is honored as the founding patriarch of the Jewish people, it is historically and biblically inaccurate to call him a Jew. The term Jew, Yehudi in Hebrew, comes from Judah, one of Abraham's great-grandsons and the fourth son of Jacob. It originally referred to members of the tribe of Judah and only much later expanded to describe the broader people of Israel, especially during and after the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE, when the southern kingdom of Judah remained while the northern tribes were scattered. During Abraham's time, there were no Israelites, no tribes, no nation called Judah, and certainly no Judaism as a religion. Abraham lived centuries before Moses, the law, the Exodus, or Mount Sinai. His relationship with God was based not on Torah observance, but on faith and covenant. He was the beginning of the story, not a character shaped by its later chapters. To call Abraham a Jew is to project a later identity onto an earlier figure. It overlooks the fact that he was a man outside of any national or religious system, a pioneer in every sense. Abraham was not a Jew by ethnicity or religion, but the forefather of the people who would one day become Jews. In that sense, Abraham was not the fruit, but the seed, a man whose faith laid the foundation for what would later emerge, but who himself stood outside the boundaries of any later definition. He was not a Jew. He was the one through whom the Jewish people would eventually come to be. While Abraham is often associated with Ur and the Semitic line of Shem, some scholars argue that he may have been Amorite, or at the very least, deeply influenced by Amorite culture. The Amorites were a powerful and widespread Semitic people group who emerged around the same period that Abraham lived, roughly the early 2nd millennium BCE. The Amorites originated in northwestern Mesopotamia and were known for their nomadic lifestyle, tribal organization, and westward migrations. They eventually settled in various parts of Mesopotamia and Canaan, founding cities like Babylon under Hammurabi. Their presence is well documented in cuneiform texts, and their linguistic patterns, naming conventions, and social customs share striking similarities with what we see in Abraham's story. For example, names ending in El, like Ishmael or Israel, the prominence of tribal patriarchs, and the practice of migrating with extended families all reflect Amorite cultural traits. Abraham's journey from Mesopotamia to Canaan, along with his interactions with kings, treaties with tribal leaders, and pastoral way of life, fits well within an Amorite cultural framework. This theory doesn't challenge Abraham's uniqueness, it enriches it. Rather than calling him out of isolation, God called Abraham out of the very heart of human civilization, from among one of the most dynamic and mobile peoples of his time. Abraham wasn't a detached mystic or desert hermit. He was part of the real, complex world of his age, fully immersed in its customs and rhythms. If Abraham was Amorite by culture, it only makes God's call more powerful, choosing a man from among the nations, not to blend in, but to break away, to begin something new. So, was Abraham an Amorite? Possibly by background, but his identity was ultimately defined not by tribe or tongue, but by the voice that called him out. For centuries, most scholars have associated the biblical Ur of the Chaldees with the well-known city of Ur in southern Mesopotamia, located in modern-day Iraq, near the Persian Gulf. This Ur was a major Sumerian city-state, an advanced urban center renowned for its towering ziggurat, centralized religious cults, and complex administration. If this were Abraham's hometown, he would have come from the heart of one of the world's earliest and most cosmopolitan civilizations. However, not all scholars agree. A growing number of researchers have proposed an alternative location, the city of Urfa, historically known as Edessa, in modern-day southeastern Turkey. This region lies much closer to Haran, the place where Abraham's family temporarily settled before continuing to Canaan. It also aligns more naturally with the northwest Mesopotamian migration routes common during Abraham's era. Support for this northern theory comes from ancient Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions, many of which identify Urfa as Abraham's birthplace. Local legends, historical writings, and archaeological patterns point to Urfa as a plausible candidate, especially given the topographical and cultural consistency with Abraham's semi-nomadic lifestyle. Unlike the grand urban society of southern Ur, Urfa's environment was defined by pastoralism, tribal society, and mountainous terrain, a world that better fits the Abraham we meet in Genesis. If this view is correct, then Abraham was not shaped by the grandeur of Sumerian temples and Chaldean courts, but by a simpler tribal context, a world of shepherds and wanderers. It would also explain why his journey to Canaan passed through Haran, rather than following the longer southern route from Lower Mesopotamia. Ultimately, this alternate location reframes our understanding of Abraham's origins. It suggests that he came not from the cosmopolitan core of the ancient world, but from its rugged frontiers, a man already on the edge, already primed to cross over. And once again, we see that Abraham defies simple categorization. He was not neatly Sumerian, not Chaldean, and not yet Hebrew by nation. His identity was already being shaped by a journey, geographical and spiritual, that would redefine him entirely. When we trace Abraham's origins, what emerges is not a man defined by one nation or culture, but a figure whose identity was layered, nuanced, and profoundly multicultural. He does not fit neatly into the categories we often try to assign. Instead, his life reveals a man shaped by many influences, yet ultimately claimed by none. Abraham was Semitic by blood, a descendant of Shem, and part of the great Semitic family that produced the Hebrews, Arameans, Assyrians, and other peoples of the ancient Near East. His genealogical roots placed him in the post-flood line that carried the memory of the true God, yet his cultural environment was far from monotheistic. He may have been Amorite by social context, sharing in their tribal customs, names, and migratory patterns. The Amorites were dominant during his lifetime, and their ways may have influenced his early experiences as a tribal patriarch and semi-nomadic herdsman. He was raised in a Chaldean region, according to the biblical reference to Ur of the Chaldees, though, historically, he could not have been ethnically Chaldean, since the Chaldeans arrived in that area centuries later. Whether he lived in southern Ur or northern Urfa, his world was deeply embedded in the Mesopotamian religious and cultural landscape. And yet, Scripture identifies him with a title that transcends all these layers, Abram the Hebrew. Whether derived from his ancestor Eber or from the root meaning to cross over, the name Hebrew speaks not only to lineage, but to destiny. He was the one who stepped beyond his birthplace, his religion, his traditions, and his identity to follow the unseen God. Abraham's story is not about a man who perfectly represents one culture, but a man called out of many cultures to become something entirely new. He was a bridge between civilizations, between East and West, old and new, pagan and covenantal. His identity was not inherited from one tradition, but forged through obedience to a divine voice. He was not fully Chaldean, not yet Jewish, And more than just Hebrew by blood, he was a man of many worlds, chosen to birth a people who would one day be set apart. In this complexity lies the beauty of his story, a multicultural man transformed by a singular call. When all the genealogies are traced and all the cultural ties considered, Abraham's truest identity cannot be confined to lineage, geography, or ethnicity. It was not his descent from Shem, his association with Ur, or even his title as the Hebrew that defined him. It was the moment when God called his name. In Genesis chapter 12, the voice of Yahweh broke through the noise of ancient idols and family tradition with a radical command: "Go to the land I will show you." With that call, Abraham stepped into a divine narrative that would forever separate him from the world he came from. He became a sojourner, not just in land, but in identity. A man walking by faith, not by sight. He left behind homeland, household gods, and even his inherited status. He took nothing with him but the promise of a future only God could see. And it was this faith, not his culture or background, that became the cornerstone of his identity. As Paul later wrote in Romans 4, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. This defining moment transcends labels. He was not chosen because he was Hebrew. He was not excluded because he wasn't Jewish. He was not limited by being from a Chaldean region. His identity was forged by a single act of trust, a covenantal response that reshaped human history. In Abraham, we see a powerful truth. Identity in God is not inherited, it is answered. It is not about who your ancestors were, but whether you respond when he calls. Abraham's greatness lies not in where he came from, but in who he followed. Abraham's story resists every category we try to place him in. Yes, he came from Semitic lineage, lived among Amorite traditions, and was born in a land remembered as Chaldean. But he defied those labels. He was called a Hebrew, but before that meant a people, it meant a crossing, a passage, a break from the past. When God called, Abraham left everything known and entered the unknown. That step of faith didn't just change his life, it changed history. So was Abraham a Hebrew? Yes. Was he a Jew? Not yet. A Chaldean? Perhaps by soil, but not by soul. Above all, he was the man God called, and he answered. And that answer still echoes today. If this story has given you a new perspective, if it has deepened your understanding or stirred something within you, I invite you to take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more biblical storytelling that explores not just history, but meaning. And if this message spoke to you, share it with someone who is seeking truth, someone ready to look beyond the surface and into the heart of what Scripture truly reveals. Thank you for watching, for walking this journey with us, and for honoring the story of a man who left everything behind to follow the voice of God. And may your own faith, like Abraham's, be marked not by where you began, but by who you chose to follow.